It all started in the middle of October. I remember that evening in detail. I was cooking dinner, our Thursday night ritual. Every Thursday for the past 7 years, I've tried to get out of the office early to cook something special. That day it was duck breast with orange sauce, Aurora's favorite dish. I was just finishing the sauce when her phone rang, left on the kitchen island. I don't usually pay attention to other people's calls, but the ringtone was unfamiliar. Not the one Aurora usually had on. She ran out of the shower wrapped in a towel, water droplets falling onto the hardwood floors, leaving dark marks. Grabbed her phone and sprinted out of the kitchen before I could say anything. "Yeah, sure. I understand. Now?" Her voice came muffled from the bedroom, but you could clearly hear the excitement in it. I stirred the sauce, trying not to listen, but something in her intonation made me tense up. 10 minutes later, she came downstairs, already dressed, her hair in a casual bun. She was wearing a black dress I didn't remember from before. "Sorry, darling." She kissed my cheek. Urgent call from the gallery. New artist, very cranky, agrees to meet only at night. Says it's only in the dark that he can properly present his work. I looked at my watch. 9:30 in the evening. But dinner? I know, I'm sorry, please. She was already putting on her coat. "I'll try not to be back too late. Don't wait up for me if you get tired." The front door slammed before I could respond. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at 2 plates of perfectly plated duck breast. The sauce was slowly cooling in the sauté pan. This had never happened before. Yes, there had been urgent business at the gallery, but not at 9 o'clock at night. And not on our Thursday. I pulled out my phone, checked the calendar. Yes, it was definitely Thursday. A day that was always just ours. For the next 2 weeks, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. Aurora was working late. Preparing a new exhibition, a very important project. Now her phone was ringing a lot at night. Each time, a new tune. Each time she would go into another room to talk. In the past, I wouldn't have paid much attention to this. Aurora had always been independent, had her own life, her own career. But something changed in her. She became absent-minded, often frozen, staring at one point. Sometimes I noticed her talking to herself, moving her lips silently. And then these sudden absences. Night meetings with artists, preparing installations, private shows. The explanation sounded plausible. After all, the contemporary art world lives by its own laws. But why then, each time I asked about the details of these meetings, did I hear slightly different versions? Yesterday, she said she was meeting with an artist in his studio. Today, that same meeting turned into a gallery show. And the next day, she mentioned they were at a coffee shop. Minor inconsistencies that anyone else would chalk up to forgetfulness. But I've been working with witness statements too long to miss the classic signs of lying. On the last Friday in November, I stayed late at the office. A complex corporate merger case needed attention. Leaving the building around 11, I decided to walk home, which was only a 15-minute walk. I was walking through the quiet streets, pondering the details of the contract, when I saw her. Aurora was walking briskly across the street, wrapped in the light-colored coat I'd given her last Christmas. She looked around nervously, but she didn't notice me standing in the shade of a tree. A black sedan pulled up beside her. I couldn't make out the license plate number, but I knew for sure there was no such car among our acquaintances. Aurora sat down in the back seat without hesitation. The car started, disappearing into the night. I stood, clutching my briefcase. She was supposed to have a meeting at the gallery tonight. At the gallery, which was on the opposite side of town. At home, I sat in the darkness of my office for a long time, trying to find a rational explanation. Aurora returned around 1 o'clock in the morning. She smelled like wine and someone else's perfume. "Sorry, I didn't tell you I'd be late. There was a new exhibit opening. I had to stay." I nodded silently, heading up to the bedroom. The next morning, picking up the dishes after breakfast, I noticed a glass with a dark lipstick imprint. Aurora never wore that color. After that evening, something snapped inside. I began to notice every little thing, every discrepancy. The lawyer's professional habit of gathering evidence became an obsession. In my office, in the bottom drawer of my desk, a folder appeared. An ordinary red folder, like dozens of others on my shelves. But this one was special. It was where I'd started to collect all the weird stuff about Aurora. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it was paranoia. But every night, as the house fell into silence, I would pull out this folder and go through the evidence I had collected. The first was a check from the Blue Oyster, a small restaurant in the business district. Nothing fancy. 2 glasses of wine, salad, steak. But the date and time kept me on my toes. That night, Aurora said she was meeting a potential buyer at the gallery. I happened to find the receipt in her coat pocket when I took the dry cleaning. Next was the phone records. I had to pull some old contacts to get the details. Dozens of calls from unknown numbers, always at late hours. I tried calling some of them back. All disconnected. Disposable cell phones? In the art world, such secrecy seemed unnecessary. "You're turning paranoid," I said to my reflection one morning while shaving. Droplets of water dripped down the fogged mirror, distorting the image. I looked older than my 44 years. When had those wrinkles between my eyebrows appeared? Aurora was getting ready for work at the time. I could hear her humming something in the bedroom. Moments like that used to fill me with warmth. Now I found myself thinking, why is she so carefree? What's behind this good mood? That afternoon, I decided to stop by her place for lunch. A spontaneous gesture, an attempt to bring normality back to our relationship. The guard at the entrance looked at me with surprise. "Mrs. McCreary?" "No, she wasn't in today. She warned me she was working remotely." That evening, I met up with my old friend Leighton at the bar where we usually discussed difficult cases. Joe the bartender had known us long enough to keep a respectful distance when we spoke. "You do realize there are ways to check things out, right?" Leighton twirled a glass of whiskey in his hands. "There are people who specialize in these kinds of situations. Are you suggesting we hire a private investigator?" "I'm suggesting we make sure. Or calm down. Because right now, my friend, you look like you're walking on the edge of a cliff." I pulled out my phone, showed him pictures of checks, printouts of phone calls. He scrutinized each document, sometimes frowning, sometimes making notes in his notebook. "There's something else." I hesitated whether to tell him. "The messages. I saw them by accident when she asked me to check something on her phone. Short, strange messages. Time is changing. Remember the light? Reflections speak the truth." Seemingly common phrases for the contemporary art world. But why did they all come from different numbers? And why did Aurora delete them immediately? "Listen." Leighton stepped forward. "I know a man. He does his job cleanly, no questions asked. If you want, I can—" The ringing of a bell over the front door interrupted him. Our new neighbor, Reed Thornton, entered the bar. When he saw us, he hesitated for a second, but then strode determinedly toward our table. "Good evening, gentlemen." His smile seemed too perfect. "Didn't expect to meet you here, Mr. McCreary. Especially after—" He hesitated, however. Never mind. Something in his tone made me wary. "After what?" Thornton took a seat at our table uninvited. "You see, I didn't want to create an awkward situation. But since we've met, I saw your wife today, at the Starbucks on 5th Avenue. She wasn't alone." I felt Leighton tense beside me. "Go on." A tall man, mid-40s, very distinctive appearance, scar across his right cheek. They were sitting in a corner. The conversation looked intense. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spy, I just happened to be there by chance." "What time was that?" My voice sounded strangely calm. "Around 2 in the afternoon. Exactly when she was supposedly working remotely." Thornton left a few minutes later, leaving behind a heavy silence. Leighton pulled out a business card, wrote a phone number on the back. "This is the man I was talking about. Give him a call if you make up your mind." At home, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at the business card. Behind the wall, Aurora was on the phone, quietly, almost in a whisper. I distinguished separate words. Time, patience. Everything will change soon. The red folder on the desk grew thicker and thicker. Tomorrow I'll call the number Leighton gave me. I need to know the truth, whatever it is. I hardly slept that night. I lay there, listening to the breathing of Aurora sleeping next to me, thinking about how small inconsistencies, coincidences, and misunderstandings make up a new reality. A reality in which my wife is a stranger with a secret life and secrets I'm afraid to even think about. It was the longest month of my life. I now knew everything. Her appointment schedule, her travel itineraries, the names of the people she saw. The little black notebook in my briefcase was fluffed with notes. The detective hired on Layton's recommendation sent reports every 3 days. Dry facts, times, places, photos. I read them in my office after midnight when Aurora was asleep, or pretended to be. Tuesday, December 18th. Meeting at the Ritz Cafe with a middle-aged man, graying whiskers, expensive suit. Duration of meeting, 2 hours and 14 minutes. Much gesticulating, 4 times he touched her arm. There was a picture in the report of Aurora throwing her head back, laughing. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her so animated at home. Thursday, December 20th. The black sedan at the gallery, the same one I'd seen a month ago. Man behind the wheel, about 35 years old, scar across his cheek. She got in the car, they headed toward the suburbs. Came home at 2 a.m. Her hair smelled like cigarette smoke. Said there was a presentation at the gallery. I checked. The gallery closed at 8. Every day brought new proof. I found business cards from strange men in her coat pockets. Randomly seen messages on her phone screen. Waiting to meet you. Hope to see you. All from different numbers. How many were there? 2, 3, more? Saturday, I was checking my credit card bills and found a charge from a lingerie store. An expensive boutique downtown. $300 for a set I'd never seen before. Who was it for? Honey, you've been kind of tense lately. Aurora crouched on the arm of my chair as I looked over the paperwork for the current case. She smelled like a new perfume. In the past, she always consulted with me before changing her fragrance. Just a lot of work. I tried to smile. It came out unnaturally. Complicated corporate fraud case. Why don't we go out tonight? Haven't been to a restaurant in a while. Don't you have a meeting with an artist? Artist? I deliberately paused before the last word. She hesitated for a split second, almost imperceptible, but I was used to noticing such details. Oh, that's right. I completely forgot. I'm sorry, darling. Maybe next time? Next time. There's always a next time. When did it start? What did I miss? Where did I go wrong? Yesterday, the detective sent new photos. Aurora walks into the Marriott Hotel on the edge of town. 20 minutes later, a tall man in a gray coat walks in. Different, not the one with the scar. They spent 2 hours there. When she came out, her hair was mussed, her lipstick slightly smudged. I sat at the hotel bar the next day, contemplating a glass of whiskey. The bartender was wiping glasses, looking at me askance. First time with us? Yeah, thought I'd stop by. Heard you have a nice bar. It is, especially popular in the evenings. Lots of business meetings. He knew. Of course he knew. Probably seen her here, maybe more than once, with different men. At home, I found a hotel card in her jacket pocket. On the back, a room number written in unfamiliar handwriting, 412. Now I had a specific number, the specific room where my wife. I couldn't finish that thought. All these late meetings, I began over dinner, watching her absent-mindedly pick at her salad. Is that normal for a gallery? Of course it is. Modern art lives by its own rules. Some artists only create at night. And meeting in hotels is part of modern art too? Fork froze over her plate. She looked up. Did fear flash in her eyes? Guilt? What do you mean? Nothing, just asking. At night I lay awake, listening to her breathing. She smelled like someone else's cologne, a subtle, barely perceptible odor. But I could smell it, like I'd felt all her lies of the last few months. Her cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. The message, tomorrow, same time, same place, don't be late. The number was unfamiliar. She thought I was asleep. She got up quietly, took the phone, went to the bathroom. I heard her whispering answers to someone, a muffled voice. When she came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep. Inside, everything was burning. How many more? How many meetings? How many men? How many lies? In the morning, I found a room key card for the Marriott in her purse. Fresh, shiny plastic. 412. Today's date. I put the key back and drove to the office. All day I sat staring at the same spot. The receptionist asked twice if everything was all right. I couldn't answer. She had a meeting in room 412 at 7. I knew what I had to do. Tonight it would be over. I'd see it with my own eyes, and let it be what it would be. That night, for the first time in 15 years, I was late for an important client meeting. I just forgot about it. I sat in my car in front of the Marriott, staring at the main entrance. The phone was ringing off the hook with the receptionist's calls, but I couldn't bring myself to answer it. Everything seemed distant and unreal work. Meetings, contracts. The only thing real was this hotel in room 412. Aurora never showed up. Not at 7, not at 8, not at 9. I sat in my car until midnight when the parking lot security guard tapped on the window, asking if everything was okay. Was everything okay? I couldn't even answer. When I got home, I found her in bed. She was already asleep, or pretending to be asleep. I could no longer tell the truth from the lie. There was a plate of dinner on the kitchen table, covered with food wrap. She was still taking care of me. Or was that part of the disguise, too? I didn't touch the food. It had been a week since I'd eaten a bite. My suits were hanging on the rack, but I didn't even notice it. Colleagues in the office were whispering behind my back. Yesterday, the senior partner called me in for a talk. "Holden, you made a mistake in the sales contract. An elementary mistake that a freshman wouldn't have made." He placed the red-marked document in front of me. "What's going on?" "You never..." "Sorry, won't happen again. Won't happen." I didn't even look at the markings. What did it matter? My mind was on something else. The key card in her purse? Number 412. Why didn't she show up? In the morning, I took a different route to the office because I couldn't see the front of the Marriott. I stopped at a stoplight next to a drugstore. Something familiar flashed in the window. Aurora's profile. I parked sharply, jumped out of the car. She was coming out of the pharmacy with a small paper bag. When she saw me, she flinched. "Holden, what are you doing here?" "You decided to take a different route." The words were jumbled. "And you?" "It's a long way from the gallery." "Yes, I..." She squeezed the bag tighter. "I should have picked up my medication." "Are you sick?" "No, it's for a friend." Another lie. I saw her fingers turn white as she clutched the package. In the car, she tossed it into the back seat. I had time to notice the name on the prescription, some complicated medical term. In the evening, I stopped by my neighbor, Reed Thornton. He seemed surprised by my visit. "Mr. McCreary, to what do I owe the pleasure? You said you saw my wife with a man. Where exactly was that?" He hesitated. For a split second, something flashed in his eyes. Concern? "At the Starbucks on Fifth Avenue, why?" "Just..." "Did you notice her taking anything from him? Maybe some pills?" "Pills?" He tensed. "Why are you asking about pills?" I didn't answer. Scraps of phrases were rolling around in my head. A prescription, the pharmacy, strange messages. In the night, I was awakened by a scream. Aurora was thrashing about in her sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. I tried to wake her. She recoiled, eyes wide open but staring blankly. "No, you can't forget. They mustn't. The light. Remember the light. Aurora, wake up!" She sat up on the bed, breathing heavily, stared at me for a few seconds, not recognizing me. Then she blinked and her gaze cleared. "I'm sorry. I had a nightmare." "You said something about light, and not to forget." "Really?" She rubbed her eyes. "I don't remember. Don't remember at all." In the morning, I found a vial of pills in the bathroom, unlabeled, white, oval. I couldn't find anything similar in the medical encyclopedia. I called my pharmacist buddy and described them. He hummed in puzzlement. "I've never heard of them." "Are you sure about the description?" That evening, a message from the detective arrived. Photos. Aurora walks into a building that looks like a medical center. A man with a scar waits in a car. An hour later, she comes out, pale, staggering. He helps her into the car. Something wasn't adding up. Hotel, meetings, pills, nightmares. I pulled out a red folder of evidence, laid it all out on the floor of my office. What am I missing? The phone rang. Leighton. "Holden, listen to me. I found information on the clinic. They were doing some kind of experiments there 5 years ago, and Aurora..." Wait, I remembered something. 5 years ago. She disappeared for a week then, said she went to an art seminar. Exactly. And those pills? I'll call you back. I rushed to the closet where the old albums were kept. I found pictures from 5 years ago. Here's Aurora at our 10-year anniversary. And here's a month after the seminar. Something had changed in her gaze. Something elusive. The doorbell rang. A man stood on the doorstep. Mr. McCreary, we need to talk. About what? About your wife and about the clinic. My name is Reed Thornton, and I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I stared at the FBI badge in Reed's hands, and the world around me began to fade. I'd been living in a hell of my own suspicions for the past few weeks, and now reality was changing again, morphing into something even more frightening. Come in. My voice sounded hoarse. When was the last time I'd had a normal conversation? A week ago, I think. Thornton sat down in the chair in my office, the one where the clients usually sat. I mechanically noted that I needed to dust the coffee table. I'd stopped noticing such things lately. There was an unfinished glass of whiskey on the table, and an ashtray of cigarette butts. I'd never smoked in the house before. Mr. McCreary, your wife is in danger. 5 words. Just 5 words. And my whole world turned upside down again. What do you mean? The Blackwood Clinic. 5 years ago, illegal experiments with a memory modification drug were conducted there. Your wife was one of the patients. I felt dizzy. Memories flashed back. That week 5 years ago when she went away for a seminar. She came back a little more distracted, sometimes frozen, staring into the void. I chalked it up to fatigue. Why did she get there? We don't know. The documentation has been destroyed, but she's one of the few who partially retained the memory of the procedures, and now she's helping us gather evidence. I stood up, walked to the window. It was drizzling rain outside. A normal December evening, people rushing home. Ordinary life. How long ago had my life stopped being ordinary? All these meetings, men, other survivors, and our undercover agents. We're trying to protect them all. My throat was dry. I tried to take a sip of whiskey, but my hand shook so badly I spilled it on my shirt. Thornton pretended not to notice. I found a key to a hotel room yesterday. A safe house. That's where we keep documents and evidence. Your wife is helping us at the risk of her life. Oh my God. All this time I suspected her. The phone rang. Leighton. I dropped the call. Your friend, Mr. Callahan, is also in the loop. He's been helping us through his connections. Of course. That's why he was trying to stop me, hinting that it wasn't that simple. I didn't finish the sentence. What do I need? Air? Time? To go back a month and not start this crazy investigation? You need to sit down, Mr. McCreary, and listen to the whole thing. I sank into the chair, noticed my reflection in the window pane, disheveled hair, wrinkled shirt. When was the last time I had a good night's sleep? Thornton pulled out a folder. Not a red one like mine, but a plain gray one. Opened it up. 5 years ago, the Blackwood Clinic began experimenting with a drug called NR27, officially to treat PTSD. In reality, they were developing a way to modify and erase memories. I looked at the pictures in the folder. Clinical rooms, equipment, people in white coats. Among the patients in one photo, I recognized a man with a scar. James Collins, ex-Marine. One of the first test subjects. He's helping us now. I remembered how jealous I was of him. God, I'm such an idiot. And Sidney Blackwood? Technically a patron of the arts, a sponsor of the gallery. In reality, one of the project managers. The gallery is a front for money laundering and recruiting new subjects. A cell phone vibrated on the table. A message from Aurora. I'll be late today. Important meeting. Thornton glanced at the screen. She's with Agent Marshall right now. They're meeting with another survivor. Why didn't she tell me? The less you knew, the safer it was for you. And for her. I stood up, walked around the office. On the shelf was our wedding picture. 15 years together. 15 years I thought I'd known my wife. What did they do to her? We don't know for sure. The documentation has been destroyed, but the drug is selective. It erases certain memories while leaving others behind. The problem is that the process is unstable. Memories sometimes come back, usually in dreams or moments of stress. Nightmares. Her nightly screams. You can't forget. And the pills? I found them in the bathroom. Experimental drug to help with side effects. Headaches, memory lapses. We're getting it through our people at the clinic. The doorbell rang. Thornton tensed, his hand reaching for his jacket. Are you expecting someone? No. Leighton stood on the threshold, saw Thornton nodded. Told me already? Just started. I stared at my best friend, trying to realize what he'd known all along. Trying to give me a hint. Why didn't you tell me straight out? Couldn't. It was too dangerous. But I was trying to stop you with this stupid investigation. I collapsed into my chair, covering my face with my hands. I'd been living in a hell of suspicion and jealousy for the last month, and she'd spent all that time risking her life trying to help other victims. What now? Now! Thornton pulled out another folder. We need your help. Legal expertise and connections in the corporate world. We're almost ready to take them on, but we need to make it clean. And Aurora? She'll continue to help us. But now with your support, it'll be a little easier. I glanced at the clock. It's almost midnight. Somewhere out there, my wife is risking her life trying to save others. And I hadn't even given her a chance to explain. I need to talk to her. Not today. Leighton put a hand on my shoulder. Let her finish the meeting. Tomorrow. Everything tomorrow. I nodded, feeling endlessly tired. Thornton and Leighton were talking about something, but I wasn't listening anymore. The only thought going through my head was, I'm sorry, love. I'm sorry for everything. I stayed up all night. I sat in the kitchen, drinking cold coffee and waiting for Aurora to return. Every rustle outside the window made me flinch. Every passing car seemed like the very car she might return in. She came in at the beginning of 5. I heard the key turn in the lock, carefully, almost silently, the way she always did when she came back late. Before, these attempts not to wake me had seemed suspicious. Now I saw them as caring. Aurora froze when she saw me in the kitchen. For a second, fear flashed in her eyes, the same fear I'd seen in the defendants in the courtroom. She quickly pulled herself together, but I'd already learned to notice those momentary changes. Holden? Why are you awake? I remained silent as I regarded her. How could I have been so blind? The pallor, the bruises under her eyes, the slightly trembling hands. Not the marks of adultery, the marks of a grueling struggle. Sit down. My voice sounded hoarse. We need to talk. She slowly lowered herself into the chair across from me. She took off her scarf, a fresh bruise on her neck, which she immediately tried to cover with her collar. What's wrong? I nodded at the bruise. Nothing. Just... She stammered, seeing my gaze. You know? It wasn't a question. She somehow realized I was aware. Reed Thornton came by today, showed his FBI badge. Aurora covered her eyes. Her fingers nervously rubbed the edge of her scarf, a habit from 5 years ago. I now realized exactly when. I'm sorry, her voice shook. I wanted to tell you, many times I wanted to. But the less you knew, the safer it was for me. Yes, Thornton explained. Silence hung in the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked, a wedding gift from my parents. Bruise. I returned to the beginning of the conversation. What happened? She touched her neck absent-mindedly. New victim, a girl, 26 years old. She started to remember, panicked. I tried to calm her down. Jesus, Aurora. It's okay. Agent Marshall had time to intervene. I stood up, walked over to the locker where they kept the first aid kit. I pulled out some ointment for my bruises, went around the table, gently touched her neck. She flinched, but let me apply the ointment. All these late-night meetings, we find them one at a time, the ones who start to remember. We help with the panic, explain what's going on. We offer protection. And the man with the scar, James Collins? He was one of the first, helped me when I started to remember. Now we're helping others together. I remembered watching them, how jealous I'd been. Shame came over me in a hot wave. I'm sorry, I thought. I decided, I know. She smiled sadly. Noticed the surveillance almost immediately. It even helped. Created extra cover. Everyone thought you were just a jealous husband. And the hotel? Room 412? A safe house. That's where we keep documents, records of conversations. It's safe there. Used to be safe. Now we'll have to change locations. I sat down next to her, took her hands in mine. They were icy cold. Tell me everything. How did it start? She took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I was preparing a contemporary art exhibit. Sydney Blackwood offered to sponsor it, but with a condition. I had to undergo innovative therapy at her clinic. Said it would help unlock my creative potential. And you accepted? It was a big opportunity for the gallery, and I trusted her. Her voice trembled. I squeezed her hands tighter. The first injections, the strange tests, questions about the past, and then the blackout started. I remembered the exhibit. I remembered you, but some parts of my life just disappeared. She stood up, walked over to the window. It was starting to get light behind the glass. When I woke up, they said the therapy was a success, that I'd spent a week at an art workshop, and I almost believed it. But then the nightmares started. Scraps of memories, faces of other patients. Why didn't you go to the police? I tried, once. A man came to me the next day, showed me pictures of you leaving the office, getting into a car. The implication was clear. My insides went cold. 5 years. 5 years she'd lived with that fear, alone. And then James showed up. He started remembering too. Found me, warned me. Later, we reached out to others, organized a mutual aid system. The FBI got involved a year ago. She fell silent, looking out the window. Her face seemed especially tired in the morning light. You know what the worst part is? She turned to me. I still don't know exactly what they erased, what memories I've lost forever. Sometimes I look at old photos and can't remember where they were taken. I look at a happy face and can't remember why I was smiling. I walked over and hugged her from behind. She clung to me, so fragile and strong at the same time. What now? Now? She turned to me. Now I need your help. We've almost collected all the evidence, but we need someone who understands corporate law, someone to help unravel their financial schemes. I'll help. Anything. It's dangerous. I don't care. She touched my face, ran her fingers along my cheek. You've lost weight. Yeah, the last month has been challenging. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I had to put you through that. I kissed her palm. No more secrets? No more secrets. We stood by the window with our arms around each other and watched the sunrise. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly alive. Scared, angry, guilty, but alive. By the way, she smiled weakly, that dark lipstick mark on the glass. That was makeup. We use disguises for meetings sometimes. I laughed, for the first time in a month. And here I thought, I know, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, for being suspicious, for following me. You couldn't have known, but I should have believed you. She shook her head. No, it was necessary. Your reaction, she was our best defense. Her phone rang on the table. She flinched. It's James. I found another one. I need to... I know. I kissed her forehead. Go. Now I know where you're going. She gathered herself quickly. At the door, she turned around. I need to meet with Reed and Leighton tonight. Discuss the way forward. I'll be here. When the door closed, I stood at the window for a long time, watched her get into the familiar black sedan. I knew now, James was there, the man with the scar, not a lover and associate, a protector. The clock was still ticking in the kitchen, the water dripped from the tap, an ordinary morning of an extraordinary day, the day a new chapter of our lives began. I pulled out my phone, dialed Leighton. I need all the materials on the clinic's finances, everything you have. On our way to your place. After Aurora left, I couldn't find a place to be. I wandered around the house, which suddenly seemed so foreign, as if I was looking at it with new eyes. Every detail had a different meaning now, every little thing screaming at my blindness. There was her dressing table. I'd checked its drawers so many times looking for clues. And there, in the most prominent place, was always a leather-bound diary. I never opened it. I considered it an invasion of privacy. It was ironic. I'd kept tabs, hired a detective, but I couldn't just read the diary. Now I held it in my hands, and the pages burned my fingers. Her handwriting, usually neat, was a nervous scribble in places. It's that dream again today. White walls, an IV, someone's voice counting to 10. I wake up in a cold sweat. I want to tell Holden, but I can't. I can't put him in danger. Found another girl. She was screaming in her sleep in her apartment. Neighbors called the police. Barely had time to intervene. She's somewhere safe now. God, how many more like us are out there? Holden asked about the lipstick on the glass today. I saw the pain in his eyes. He's thinking, no, I can't write that. He'd rather think that than know the truth. Let him hate me, just so he's safe. I sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall. There was a lump in my throat. 5 years. 5 goddamn years she'd carried this burden alone. And I'd made her life harder with my suspicions. The phone rang. Leighton. Coming to see you. There's news. Wait. My voice shook. You knew all along and watched me go crazy with jealousy. A pause. Yes. Why didn't you stop me? Because your reaction was the perfect cover. Everyone saw an obsessively jealous husband. No one was looking for the real reasons. I hung up the phone. Standing up, I walked over to the bar. My gaze fell on the picture on the mantelpiece, our trip to Italy, 4 years ago. Aurora laughing, framing her face to the sun. Was that trip before or after the clinic? Does she remember that moment? Or is it one of the stolen memories? The doorbell rang. Leighton stood on the threshold with a bulky folder under his armpit. You look lousy. He strode into the kitchen, pulling a bottle of water from the refrigerator. Been reading her diary. Oh, that's it. He sat down across from me. Look, I know you're feeling bad right now, but we need your head clean. We've got a lead. I shook my head. How did she live with it? How has she been coping? She's strong, stronger than you think. And I kept tabs on her, suspected her of cheating. Christ, I hired a detective. And it saved her life. Leighton stepped forward. Your following was the perfect explanation for the outside surveillance. As long as Blackwood thought Aurora was being followed by a jealous husband, she didn't look for real watchers. I stood up, walked to the window. Somewhere out there right now, my wife was risking her life trying to save others. What's in the folder? The clinic's financials. We need your experience as a corporate lawyer. We spent the next few hours sorting through the paperwork. I immersed myself in the work, trying to drown out the guilt. Figures, invoices, offshore companies. I was in my element here. Look, I pointed to a line in the report. They spend the money through a charitable foundation. That's why the gallery... The doorbell interrupted me. Aurora stood on the doorstep, drenched, pale but alive. Hi, she smiled uncertainly. Can I come in? I stepped toward her, hugged her, pulled her close to me. She smelled like rain and for some reason a hospital. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm sorry for everything. Shh, she hugged me back. Don't be. I read your journal. She tensed, but didn't pull away. And what did you think? I think I was a blind idiot. No. She pulled away, looked me in the eye. You were exactly what you were supposed to be. Your suspicions protected me better than any conspiracy. Leighton coughed delicately. I think I'll be going now. I'll leave the papers here. When he left, we sat down on the couch. Aurora rested her head on my shoulder, just like she used to before this whole nightmare. Remember our trip to Italy? I nodded at the picture. Partially, she smiled sadly. I remember St. Mark's Square. I remember the cafe where you ordered the awful wine, and how we got to the hotel is a complete disaster. Does it hurt? Physically, I mean. Sometimes. There are headaches, especially when I'm trying to remember something specific. I kissed the top of her head. Her hair was still damp from the rain. Tell me about today. She sighed. Found another victim, a nurse from the suburbs. Started flashing back during her shift at the hospital. Almost gave a patient the wrong injection. We got there in time. We? Me and James. He's a really good man, Holden. I know you thought, shh. It was my turn to reassure her. I don't think about anything like that anymore. She cried, for the first time in my memory in 5 years. Silently, only her shoulders shook. I held her, stroking her back, feeling her t-shirt getting wet with tears. I'm sorry. She blew her nose. It's just, had to hold on for so long. So tired of pretending. Lying to you every day. No more pretending. Yeah, but you know what the worst part is? She looked up at me with reddened eyes. I'm not sure that all my feelings for you are real. That they didn't change something back there at the clinic. My insides shivered. What do you mean? Sometimes I look at old pictures of us, and I can't remember the emotion of that moment. They've erased the memories. But could they change the feelings? I love you, Holden. But is it the same feeling I had before the clinic? I took her face in my palms. Listen to me. Whatever your feelings were then, they're real now. We're real. And we'll get through this. She nodded, snuggled up against me. Somewhere in the city lurked a clinic where people's souls were mutilated. But here, at this moment, was just my wife, so strong and so vulnerable at the same time. You know, she whispered. Now, for the first time in 5 years, I feel truly at home. I hugged her tighter, feeling the tears coming up. So much time lost, so much pain inflicted. The morning started unusually early. For the first time in a long time, we had breakfast together. Not hastily, not intense silence, but as before. I was making an omelet, watching Aurora make fresh coffee out of the corner of my eye. Her movements were precise, confident, a little ritual she hadn't forgotten even after the clinic. You know, she stirred the sugar in her cup, the tinkle of the spoon echoing in the morning silence. For the first time in 5 years, I can just sit here and not make excuses for why I'm leaving. I set a plate in front of her. And it's the first time in a month that I've made a proper breakfast instead of staring out the window, trying to spot suspicious cars. She smiled weakly, but her eyes remained serious. We have a lot to talk about, now that you know. Yes, I sat down across from her. Tell me everything, from the beginning. For the next hour she talked and I listened, making notes in my notebook, an old lawyer's habit. Facts, dates, names added up to a monstrous picture. The clinic, the experiments, the missing memories. I wrote it all down mechanically, but a cold rage boiled up inside. These are the documents we've collected. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket. But we can't understand the funding scheme. It's too complexly convoluted. Show me. I opened the laptop and we plunged into our work. Now, working together, everything seemed clearer. She pointed out suspicious transactions. I traced their path through offshore companies. Look, I pointed to the screen. They're using the gallery as a front. The money goes through the purchase of non-existent paintings. That's why Blackwood was so insistent on my involvement. Aurora bit her lip. She wanted someone from inside the art world. And she got more than she bargained for, an expert on contemporary art who remembers the procedures. Aurora shuddered. I took her hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No, it's okay. She squeezed my fingers. You can talk about it openly now. And that's why they're so afraid. I remember too much. Her phone rang. James. That call used to make my insides flip. Now I just took her other hand, letting her know I was near. Yeah, I understand. We'll be right there. What's wrong? Found more documents. At the abandoned branch of the clinic. We have to get them before they realize it. I'm with you. She shook her head. It's too dangerous. No more secrets, remember? I'm a lawyer. I know how to properly seize documents so they're legally enforceable. A pause. Then a nod. Okay, but we'll stop by Reed's first. We need to coordinate everything. On the way, I saw for the first time how their system worked. Aurora sent encrypted messages, used different phones. Every action was thought out, every step calculated. Leighton was waiting for us in Reed's office. He nodded approvingly when he saw me. Finally, the whole team is here. James Collins, the man with the scar, extended his hand to me. Glad to have you with us. I apologize for the misunderstanding. I shook his hand. It felt strange to shake the hand of a man you thought for a month was your wife's lover. I'm the one who should be apologizing. For following me. Forget it, she helped us. We spent the next hour planning the operation. I watched Aurora, she was in her element, confidently handing out instructions, arguing with Reed about the details. Where had that frightened woman who'd cried on my shoulder yesterday gone? Or was she always like that, strong, determined, just hiding it from me? Right here. I pointed to the floor plan of the building. If the documents are in there, we need to take an inventory. All boxes need to be sealed. Photo and video evidence is mandatory. Why? James asked. Because we're not just gathering information. We're preparing evidence for trial. Aurora squeezed my hand. Her eyes read gratitude. Finally, someone was seeing the full picture, could turn their scattered evidence into a real case. It was well past midnight when we got home. In the trunk were boxes of documents, everything described, numbered, recorded. On the kitchen table was the cold cup of coffee I hadn't finished that morning. Such an ordinary detail in an extraordinary life. Tired? Aurora leaned against the door jamb. A little, but it's a good tired. She came over, hugging me from behind. Thank you for believing, for helping. I turned to her. You know what I realized today? You and I have always been a good team. We just forgot about it. Yeah, she smiled. Remember when we organized your first fundraiser? You did the paperwork. I did the creative part. I remember. And that memory, real. She nodded. Absolutely, definitely real. You know, some moments I remember as vividly as if they were yesterday, and some, like watching an old movie with a bad tape. I pulled her to me. We'll make new memories, and this time, no one will steal them. She pressed herself against me. You know what the most amazing thing is? I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time in 5 years, I'm not afraid. Because we're together now. Yes, and because now we have a plan. Because now we have... There was a plan. The documents found today would form the basis of a lawsuit tomorrow. No longer just scattered evidence, a full-fledged case. My specialty, my battleground. You know? I looked at my watch. It's late, but I could use some coffee. Real coffee, not the kind they brew in Reed's office. She smiled. The same smile I'd missed so much. I'll be right there. We'll talk about tomorrow at the same time. I watched as she conjured up the coffee machine. There was a new confidence in her movements. It was as if the weight of the mystery she'd been carrying for 5 years had finally lifted from her shoulders. We sat in the kitchen until dawn, planning, discussing, arguing. Just like we used to, before this whole nightmare. Only now we were stronger, wiser, and very, very angry. They'll pay for everything, Aurora said, looking up at the rising sun. For every stolen memory. They will. I squeezed her hand. To the full extent of the law. It was going to be a busy day ahead. New documents to analyze, a lawsuit to prepare, meetings with other victims. But now, in the morning light, with the smell of fresh coffee and the warmth of her hand in mine, I felt absolutely certain. For the past 3 days, our house had become the headquarters of the operation. My office was crammed with documents. Boxes of evidence occupied every available corner. On the walls, there were boards with photos, diagrams, notes. From the outside, it probably looked like the set of a movie about maniacs, but every detail here mattered. Find anything? Maybe. She held out a piece of paper to me. Look at the dates of the hospitalizations. See a pattern? Every second Thursday of the month, I studied the document, and it's always a different patient. Exactly. Now compare that to the medication supply schedule. She was right. Everything matched up. Deliveries, hospitalizations, large transfers of money, a system, precise and ruthless. The doorbell rang. We both flinched. Aurora instinctively reached into her bag where the spare phone lay. I'll take a look. I walked to the door, peering through the peephole. It's Leighton. He walked in, shaking raindrops off his coat. His usually impeccable appearance now seemed rumpled, shadows lingering under his eyes. There's news. He strode into the kitchen, pouring himself coffee from the nearly empty coffee pot. And you're not going to like it. Aurora sat down at the table, clutching her cup with both hands. I stood behind her back, placing my hands on her shoulders, a small gesture of support that had become our new tradition. Blackwood suspected something. There's been an unscheduled records check at the gallery. They're looking for a leak. I felt Aurora's shoulders tense under my hands. That's not all. 2 of our informants haven't made contact. Who? Said Aurora's voice trembled. A nurse from the East Branch, and a security guard. Aurora closed her eyes. I knew she blamed herself for every casualty. There's good news. Leighton pulled out a flash drive. We've gotten access to their internal correspondence. There's some interesting stuff on there. We spent the next hour studying the new documents. I made notes. Aurora noted familiar names. Gradually, the picture became clearer and scarier. Look, I pointed to the screen. They're preparing a new batch of the drug, a stronger version. When? Next Thursday. Aurora went pale. 5 days from now. Yes, and judging by the paperwork, they already have a list of new patients. Leighton nodded grimly. Exactly. There's hardly any time left. A heavy silence hung in the kitchen. We have to make it. Aurora stood up, walking to the window. Have to stop them before Thursday. I stared at her silhouette against the window. So fragile on the outside, but inside, a steel rod. For 5 years she'd fought alone. Now her battle had become ours. We're almost done. I laid out the paperwork on the table. The lawsuit is drafted, the evidence is gathered. We just need to... The ringing of the phone interrupted me. James's number. Go ahead. They're at the gallery building right now, 4 in a black sedan. Aurora, hearing his voice from the speaker, tensed. Following? Yes, and it's no ordinary security. These guys, they're professionals. Understood. Be careful. I hung up the phone. Aurora looked at me, and in her eyes I could see fear not for herself, for others. They've started the hunt, she said quietly but firmly. Then we're on the right track. I walked over to her. They're scared. And that makes them especially dangerous. Leighton finished his coffee. We need to speed things up. Are we filing the lawsuit tomorrow? Yes. All the paperwork's ready. I've arranged for Judge Ramirez to take personal control of the case. And if they try to... Aurora didn't finish the sentence. They won't. I put my arm around her. There are too many eyes watching this case. Too many copies of documents in secure locations. Leighton left around midnight. It was just the 2 of us in the hushed house. Aurora was washing dishes. I watched as she compiled the cups into the cupboard, each in its place, perfect order in the midst of the chaos of our lives. What are you thinking about? I walked over, hugging her from behind. About how tomorrow everything will change. Once the lawsuit is filed, there's no turning back. Are you scared? Yes. She turned to me. But not for myself. For you, for James, for everyone else. They won't stop, Holden. I know their methods. We won't stop either, and there are more of us than they think. She nodded, pressing herself against me. We stood like that for a few minutes, listening to the night silence of the house. Somewhere water dripped from the faucet. The gasket would have to be replaced. Such simple, homely thoughts in the midst of preparing for war. Shall we go to bed? I kissed her on the lips. Big day tomorrow. Yeah, I'll just check the windows and the alarm system. A new ritual since our confrontation with the clinic began. Every night, check windows, doors, security cameras, phones charged, bag of essentials packed, always prepared for the worst. In the bedroom, Aurora couldn't sleep for a long time. She tossed and turned, then sat up in bed. You know what the worst part is? She spoke into the darkness. I'm afraid that they'll get to my memory again. That one day I'll wake up and won't remember these days. I won't remember how you helped me, how we fought together. I took her hand. Don't be afraid, I'll remind you. I'll remember everything. Promise? I promise. The Echo Gallery had never looked so grand. The lights, the music, the elegantly dressed guests with glasses of champagne, just like a normal vernissage. But today, every detail had a double bottom. Every element was part of a carefully planned operation. I stood at the entrance, adjusting my cufflinks, Aurora's gift for our 10th anniversary. The tuxedo was a little tight in the shoulders. I'd finally started to regain the weight I'd lost over the past month. Nearby, Leighton, impeccable in his dark suit, was discreetly checking his earpiece. "Everyone in position," he whispered. "The extraction team is waiting for the signal." I nodded, looking at the incoming guests. Journalists, art historians, collectors, and among them FBI agents, indistinguishable in their evening gowns. Aurora shone. In a long navy blue dress, she went from guest to guest talking about the concept of the exhibition. "Memory and oblivion," she called the project. No one but the initiated understood the true meaning. "Each work is a story of loss," I heard her explain to an elderly critic. "A story about how fragile our memory is, how easily we can lose ourselves." The center hall was occupied by an installation, hundreds of photographs suspended on thin threads. On each was a face, a date, a fragment of a medical record. Evidence disguised as art. "Genius," Leighton whispered. "No one will suspect they're looking at evidence." In another room, a video installation. Victims' testimony, skillfully edited to look like art house. The truth hidden behind the artistic device. James, unaccustomed to wearing a suit, was on duty at the entrance to the technical corridor. His scar now seemed part of the image, a brutal gallery guard. "She's on her way," Reed's voice in his earpiece. 5 minutes." I caught Aurora's gaze across the hall. She nodded faintly and continued her conversation with the critique group. Sydney Blackwood showed up at 8 sharp, as scheduled. Flawless in her white suit, with a string of pearls around her neck. A shark in designer clothes. "Aurora, darling!" Her voice boomed through the hall. "What an amazing exhibition! So candid!" I saw my wife's back tense, but her voice sounded perfectly calm. "Sydney, I'm so glad you came. Let me show you the key works." They moved down the hall. Aurora was pointing to photographs, explaining a concept. Blackwood nodded, smiled, and only I noticed the expression in her eyes gradually changing. Recognition, anxiety, fear. "Right here," Aurora paused at the center installation, "is the story of a girl who lost 5 years of her life. Look closely at the dates." Blackwood froze. The picture was of her own clinic building. "And here," they moved on to the next room, "the stories of other patients. Do these faces look familiar to you?" "I don't know what you mean." "Really? Let me refresh your memory." At Aurora's signal, all the screens turned on simultaneously. Dozens of voices rang out in unison, telling their stories. Stories of lost memories, of strange procedures, of waking up in the clinic. Blackwood turned toward the exit and froze. James stood there, blocking the way. "Do you recognize me, doctor? Experiment number 47. The guests began to turn around. The reporters were already pulling out their cameras. "This is slander! I'm going to sue!" "Already filed." I stepped forward, holding out a folder to her. "The suit was accepted for filing this morning. All the evidence is here, in this exhibit. Every photo, every video is part of the case." "You wouldn't dare! We already have—" Aurora came over to me, took my hand. "This exhibit isn't just art. It's an indictment." Reed stepped forward, showing his badge. "Sydney Blackwood, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." It was over quickly. The agents led Blackwood out through the service entrance, avoiding the crowd of reporters. There was excitement in the room. Art critics had just witnessed the most unusual performance of the year. Later, when the main commotion had subsided, Aurora and I stood at the gallery window. Flashing beacons were flashing below. Reporters were taking comments from witnesses. "Are you okay?" I put my arm around her shoulders. "I don't know." She clung to me. "This feels like a dream. Is it over?" "It's just beginning. Now there's going to be a trial, depositions, a long process. But they can't hurt anyone else." "No, they won't." We watched the last boxes of evidence being hauled away. James was coordinating the process. Reed was giving instructions to the agents. Leighton was talking to the press about something. "You know," Aurora turned to me, "I remembered something. That day we met. It was like a blurry picture before, but now it's perfectly clear. And what did you remember? Your coffee. You spilled it on my dress, got horribly embarrassed and offered to buy a new one. And I laughed and said, "That you preferred dinner." I smiled. "It was a beige dress." "Yes, that's right." Her eyes brightened. They couldn't take that memory away. It was always here, just hidden. I kissed her, right there in the middle of the gallery, in front of the remaining guests and staff. "Mr. and Mrs. McCreary," Reed walked over to us. "The car is waiting. You'll be escorted home." At home, we sat in the kitchen for a long time, drinking tea, no alcohol. I wanted to keep this moment in crystal clarity of mind. Aurora was still in her evening dress. I loosened my bow tie. "What now?" She twirled the cup in her hands. "Now we're going to live, just live. And help others? Those who haven't remembered yet? If that's what you want." "I do, but in a different way now. Openly, legally. Let's turn the gallery into a place where art really heals." I hugged her tighter. There was a lot of work ahead, trials, depositions, setting up a foundation. But now, in this moment, there was only my wife, smelling of perfume and champagne. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. A new day of a new life.